I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room, flipping through an outdated magazine, when my phone rang. The number flashing across the screen was my only son, David. Relief washed over me at first. He rarely called without a reason these days. But the moment I answered, his voice hit me like a knife through the heart. Cold, flat, and almost rehearsed, he said, "Mom, we're flying to Europe tomorrow. We needed the money, so I already sold your mountain cabin and your car. It's done. Take care of yourself." Then silence. He hung up before I could even speak. 44 years raising him, sacrificing every ounce of my energy, patching his clothes, staying up nights when he was sick, praying over his future. And he discarded me with fewer words than he'd use for a telemarketer. The phone slipped from my trembling hands and landed on my lap. Around me, people coughed, flipped papers, adjusted their coats, and no one noticed that my world had just shattered. But strangely, instead of collapsing into sobs as I might have expected, I sat very still. A calm I hadn't felt in months washed over me. A calm born of something I had almost forgotten. My name is Margaret Harris. I am 71 years old, a widow of 6 months. And that day I realized my son never truly knew me at all. You see, there was something David and his wife Melissa didn't know, something that Robert, my late husband, had placed in my hands just days before he left this earth. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening to me from? Are you in your living room, maybe in a small town in Texas, or on a porch somewhere in Georgia, or perhaps in a busy New York apartment? Comment below and let me know, because I love imagining the places where my story travels. And please don't forget to subscribe, because this isn't just my pain. It's a story of betrayal, of secrets, and of justice hidden in plain sight. 6 months earlier, Robert had sat across from me at our breakfast table in Denver, pouring coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one with sunflowers painted on it. He had kissed my forehead and whispered, "Good morning, my love." Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. Moments later, his hand froze around the handle of the cup and his eyes glazed over. A massive heart attack took him before I could even rise from my chair. Since that morning, grief had become the rhythm of my life. I lived in silence, drifting through rooms filled with his memory, while David and Melissa visited more often than usual. At first, I thought it was kindness, love, maybe even concern. They helped with the funeral arrangements, brought groceries, insisted I see a doctor for a checkup. "Mom, you've got to take better care of yourself now that you're alone," Melissa would say, touching my arm with a smile I mistook for compassion. I see now it was calculation. The cabin they sold had been our sanctuary, a little retreat in the Colorado Rockies that Robert and I bought when David was 15. Every summer, we spent weeks there, cooking over fire pits, hiking trails, decorating pine trees with Christmas lights in July, just to make memories. David brought friends, then girlfriends, then later Melissa. I cooked for everyone, cleaned, kept the tradition alive. I never dreamed my son would see those walls as dollar signs. And the car, the cherry red Chevy truck Robert loved more than any other possession, was gone too. He used to wash it every Sunday until it gleamed, park it under the same elm tree, run his hand across the hood as if it were alive. That truck still smelled like his aftershave. It was the last piece of him I had. Melissa knew what it meant, and still they sold it. My chest should have crumbled under the weight of it, but instead, my mind went back, unbidden, to a moment 3 days before Robert died. He had pressed a manila envelope into my hands, his eyes serious. "Maggie, put this in your dresser drawer. If something happens to me, open it only when you're ready." After the funeral, amid casseroles and condolences, I had tucked it away and then forgotten it. Until that moment, sitting in the doctor's waiting room with betrayal burning through my veins, I remembered. The nurse called my name and I shuffled into the office. The doctor examined me, spoke words about blood pressure and diet, but I barely heard him. All I could think about was that envelope. As I walked to the bus stop afterwards, my son had taken my car after all, I smiled for the first time in months. David thought he had stripped me bare. He thought I was left with nothing. But Robert had always been a man who planned ahead. I rode the bus home through Denver's crowded streets, watching storefronts flash by, each face outside the window carrying its own story of survival. Mine was waiting in a drawer. The house felt hollow when I stepped inside, shadows stretching across the living room where Robert's favorite chair still sat untouched. I went straight to my bedroom, pulled open the top drawer of my dresser, and there it was, the manila envelope, edges yellowed from waiting. My hands shook as I carried it to the bed. Robert's handwriting, so neat and steady, spelled my name on the front. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside were documents, legal deeds, bank certificates, and a handwritten letter. Tears blurred my vision as I read. My dearest Maggie, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. Forgive me for not telling you everything, but I wanted to spare you worry. For years, I invested our savings quietly, and now what we built is more than either of us dreamed. You don't just own the cabin. You own 6 other properties across Denver, including the apartment building where David and Melissa live. You also hold shares in companies worth more than you can imagine. You are not poor, my love. You never will be. My breath caught. I read it again and again. The deeds listed houses, a downtown condo, even a small motel near Boulder. Bank statements showed numbers I never knew Robert had touched. And all of it, every single piece, was in my name. He had done it to protect me and to protect us from David's greed, because Robert had seen it too, long before I admitted it. Our son has a careless heart. He doesn't value what he has. But you, Maggie, you are the rock. You will know what to do. He pressed the letter to my chest, tears soaking into the paper. David had cut me off with a single phone call, but Robert had armed me with a secret arsenal. He had left me not just memories, but power. And as I sat there on our bed, the scent of his cologne lingering on the pillow, I whispered aloud, "Thank you, Robert." He thinks he won, but this isn't over. I could already picture David's face when the truth would one day crash into his world. For now, though, I would stay quiet. I would let him believe his betrayal had broken me, because sometimes the sweetest revenge is not striking too soon, but waiting. Waiting until the very moment they believe they are safe, and then showing them the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dim glow of the kitchen lamp. Robert's envelope spread before me like a map of a life I never knew we had, sipping lukewarm tea that tasted like nothing. My son thought I was powerless, and for the first time since Robert's death, I realized I wasn't. I had been cast aside, written off like an old bill, but I had the means to turn everything upside down without David or Melissa even suspecting. At dawn, I carefully tucked the deeds and bank statements back into the envelope and slid it under the floorboard beneath my bed. Let them think I had nothing. Let them smirk on their way to Europe with their ill-gotten cash. The phone rang just after sunrise. It was David again, and his tone was softer, but the coldness still lingered like frost. "Mom, we went ahead and transferred your share from the cabin and the truck. It's not much, but it'll cover a few months until you can find something smaller. 30%. That's fair, right? We need most of it from Melissa's business opportunity in Paris." 30% of what was already mine? I held the phone tight enough that my knuckles whitened. "Of course, son," I said, keeping my voice even. "When are you leaving?" "This afternoon. Bags are packed. It'll be 6 months, maybe longer, but don't worry. When we get back, we'll help you find an apartment that fits your needs." He spoke as if I were a pet in need of a kennel. I laughed bitterly once the line went dead, not the laugh of joy, but of disbelief. I logged into my bank account online, and sure enough, the deposit sat there, smaller than it should have been, insulting compared to the true value of the properties they'd pawned. They'd rushed the sale, no doubt, desperate to grab quick cash for their escape. I watched from my front window later that afternoon as they dragged shiny suitcases into a waiting cab, Melissa's expensive handbag glittering under the sun. They didn't look up, didn't wave, didn't even pretend to care. Just like that, they were gone, laughing as if the whole world were theirs. I poured myself another cup of tea and laid Robert's papers on the kitchen table again. I could call the police, scream fraud, drag my own son through court. But there was another way, a way that would sting deeper. I dialed the number of Charles Whitman, the lawyer who had handled Robert's modest will after the funeral. He was a thin man in his late 50s with a sharp mind hidden behind kind eyes. And he had told me then, "Call me anytime you need Mrs. Harris." Well, I needed him now. "Mr. Whitman, I found documents Robert left me. I don't quite understand them. Could I come see you tomorrow morning?" His tone shifted immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Harris. Bring everything. I'll clear my schedule." That night, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the wine-colored dress Robert always said made me look regal. For months, I had been nothing but a grieving widow in sweaters and slippers, but tomorrow, I would be a woman with a purpose. When I arrived at Whitman's downtown Denver office, the marble floors and brass railings seemed to shine brighter than I remembered. He welcomed me warmly, but his expression darkened as soon as I spread Robert's documents across his desk. "Mrs. Harris," he said slowly, flipping through the deeds, the stock certificates, the bank statements. "This is extraordinary. Robert was a very wise man. Do you realize what this means?" "I know I'm the owner," I replied carefully. "But what can I do legally? They sold the cabin. They sold the truck. They told people I was too sick to handle my own affairs." His brows furrowed. That sale was fraudulent. Melissa had no right to sell the cabin, nor the truck, unless you signed over power of attorney. Did you? My mind flashed back to the fog after Robert's funeral, the stack of papers David had thrust in front of me, assuring me it was just paperwork for the inheritance and funeral costs. My grief had been so heavy, I barely looked at what I signed. Shame burned my cheeks. I might have signed something, I admitted. He leaned forward. "If you signed under deception, we can fight this. The cabin can be returned, the sale nullified. The truck may be harder, but possible if we prove coercion. And these other properties, this apartment building, the motel, the houses, you are their rightful owner. No one can take that from you." I sat back in the leather chair, a strange smile tugging at my lips. "Mr. Whitman, I don't want lawsuits or police knocking on doors. Not yet. I want silence. I want my affairs restored quietly. Can you do that?" His eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Why the secrecy?" "Because," I said, my voice steady, "my son believes he won. He believes he stripped me of everything. I want him to believe that a little longer. And when the time comes, I want the truth to crush him in ways a courtroom never could." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll make the calls. Give me a few weeks." When I left his office, I didn't feel like the widow shuffling through life anymore. I walked the busy Denver streets with a new fire in my chest. Let the neighbors whisper pity. Let David think I was drowning. In truth, I was building something stronger than vengeance. I was building justice. Over the following weeks, I played my role well. To the neighbors, I was the poor, abandoned mother. "Margaret, are you all right now that David and Melissa left you?" "Yes, dear. They have business overseas. I'll manage." They all looked at me with that pitying expression, the one that said, "Thank God it isn't my tragedy," and I let them believe it. Every morning, I ate at the same breakfast table Robert and I had shared for decades, and every afternoon, I walked the neighborhood, nodding to the butcher, the mailman, the children on bikes, all while secretly orchestrating my quiet reclamation through Whitman's updates. "Mrs. Harris," he told me one Thursday, "the fraudulent sale of the cabin has been nullified. It is yours again." Relief swelled in my chest, but I kept my voice cool. "And the apartment building where my son lives, that one requires administrative changes, but soon it will be under your direct control. 2 more weeks." "Perfect. Keep it discreet." That evening, I pulled out an old photograph of David as a boy, sitting cross-legged on the cabin porch, grinning at Robert while marshmallows roasted on a stick. My heart ached, but I whispered to the picture, "You took everything from me, David, and now you'll learn what it feels like to lose." For the first time in months, I slept without dreams, knowing the game had only just begun. The weeks that followed were some of the strangest of my life. Officially, I was the poor widow left behind, abandoned by her only son and his flashy wife. But in reality, I was living a double life, part grieving mother, part businesswoman pulling invisible strings. Each morning, I performed the role everyone expected of me, shuffling to the corner store, exchanging polite words with neighbors who tilted their heads with pity. "Margaret, dear, are you eating enough? Do you need help with errands?" asked Mr. Campbell, the mailman, one Tuesday morning. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, smiling faintly, and he nodded, satisfied, never guessing that the truth was so far from his assumptions. By afternoon, I became someone else entirely. I sat at my kitchen table with Robert's documents spread out like a battlefield map, on the phone with Charles Whitman, plotting my quiet reclamation. "Mrs. Harris," he said during one update, "the process of shifting direct control of the apartment building is almost finished. In 2 weeks, you'll have full authority. And there's something else. Melissa and David's sale of the Chevy truck was technically legal because of the power of attorney, but I've located the buyer. He's a collector in Fort Collins, and I believe he'd be willing to negotiate." My heart clenched. That truck was Robert's pride, and the thought of it in some stranger's garage stung. "Get it back," I whispered. "Whatever it takes, get it back." "Understood," he replied. Meanwhile, word trickled back to me about David and Melissa in Europe. Aurora, my lifelong neighbor with ears sharper than any detective, came hurrying to my porch one afternoon, cheeks flushed from gossip. "Margaret, did you hear? Melissa's family told my cousin in Chicago that things aren't going well for them in Paris. Some kind of business deal fell through, and the bank here is sniffing around. Apparently, David signed loans using the condo as collateral, but since he's not actually the owner..." She let the sentence hang. I sipped my tea, keeping my face carefully neutral. Inside, my pulse quickened with satisfaction. They had gambled with everything, believing they were untouchable, and now the cracks were spreading. "That sounds difficult for them," I said mildly. "Yes, very difficult," Aurora pressed, eager for a reaction. "Do you think they'll come back?" "Time will tell," I said, and changed the subject. That night, as I watered the plants Robert had planted years ago, I thought about irony. My son had sold off memories, our cabin, his father's beloved truck, believing me powerless. And now, quietly, piece by piece, I was pulling those things back into my hands. But it wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about teaching a lesson David and Melissa could never forget. Days passed, and one Friday morning, Charles called again. "Mrs. Harris, good news. The cabin has been fully restored to your name. The buyers were compensated and stepped away without issue. And the apartment building, your son's residence, is now legally and administratively under your direct ownership. You have full authority to manage or evict tenants as you see fit." I pressed the receiver tighter, adrenaline rushing. "And the truck?" The collector agreed. It's coming home, though he requested a small compensation. Excellent, Mr. Whitman. Now, I need you to prepare one more thing. A letter. An eviction notice for my son and Melissa. But not yet. I want it delivered when they return. Until then, silence. There was a pause on the line. Mrs. Harris, this is not a small step. Are you certain? My voice was steady. Absolutely certain. He discarded me like trash. Now he will learn what it means to lose the ground beneath his own feet. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen with a smile curling at the edge of my lips. I could almost picture their faces when the letter arrived. The disbelief, the panic, the dawning realization that everything they had was never theirs to begin with. But I was patient. Revenge, I decided, was best brewed slowly, like Robert's favorite pot of coffee. Over the following week, the neighborhood buzzed with news. Aurora burst onto my porch one morning, practically breathless. Margaret, it's happened! The bank is after David! They discovered he used the condo for loans, but it's not in his name! My brother-in-law who works there says it's a mess. And Melissa, apparently she didn't know anything. They're saying she'll have to return to deal with the fallout. I feigned surprise, pressing my hand to my chest. Really? That's unfortunate. Inside, though, I felt Robert's presence like a guiding hand. He had prepared everything perfectly. By Friday, my phone rang again. It was Charles. Mrs. Harris, I have news. Your son and his wife just landed in New York. Word is they had a massive falling out overseas. Melissa stayed behind. David returned alone. My eyebrows arched. Alone? So the mighty couple wasn't so mighty after all. And the eviction notice? It will be delivered to David at the condo today. 30 days to vacate, standard procedure. I nodded to myself. Perfect. That night, I sat on the porch under the Colorado stars, sipping tea and whispering into the darkness. Robert, it's starting. Our son is about to discover the truth you hid in plain sight. Thank you for watching over me. The game is finally turning. For the first time in months, my heart felt light. David thought he was returning to the same world he left, a world where I was broken, powerless, discarded. But he was about to find himself standing on land that was no longer his, in a house that belonged to me, facing a storm he could never have imagined. The question wasn't whether he would fall. The question was, how far? When I got my diagnosis, I decided to use whatever time I had left to create something meaningful for you. You always loved horses, always talked about having land someday where you could raise them. So I found the last place anyone would expect me to go, the farm I'd fled at 18, vowing never to return. He leaned closer to the camera. What my brothers don't know is that I legally bought the farm from our father before he died. The old man was broke after years of failed schemes, drinking away the family money. He sold it to me for a fraction of its worth, desperate for cash, swearing me to secrecy from my brothers, who still thought they would inherit it someday. This explained the legal challenge. They believed they had rights to property that Joshua had legitimately purchased. The farm was in ruins when I bought it, Kat, just like when I was a kid. But this time, I had the resources to transform it. Every business trip in the last 3 years, I was here, overseeing renovations, building something for you. Outside, the brothers had approached the door again. This time, the oldest, Robert, held a document against the window for me to see, a court order of some kind. My brothers will come for it, Joshua continued in the video, his expression hardening. They never wanted the farm until last year when oil was discovered in the region. Suddenly, the worthless property they'd mocked me for buying was valuable. They'll try everything to take it from you. One of the brothers was on the phone again, his expression triumphant as he ended the call. In the bottom drawer of this desk is a blue folder with every legal document you need. The farm is unquestionably yours. I made sure of it. Joshua's face softened again. But Kat, Whether you keep it or sell it is entirely your choice. I built this place for you, filled it with beauty for you, but I don't want it to become a burden. A vehicle was coming up the driveway, a police cruiser with Royal Canadian Mounted Police markings. The brothers watched its approach with satisfied expressions. "One last thing," Joshua said. "In the stables, you'll find 6 horses, all breeds you've admired over the years. The staff I've hired will continue caring for them whether you're here or not. They're my last gift to you, along with the means to enjoy them." The video ended, freezing on Joshua's smiling face as knocking resumed at the door, more authoritative this time. "Mrs. Mitchell, RCMP, we need you to open the door, please." With a deep breath, I closed the laptop, retrieved the blue folder from the drawer, and went to face whatever came next. As I reached for the door handle, my phone rang. Jenna, our daughter, calling from home. I hesitated, then answered. "Jenna, now's not a good time." "Mom." Her voice was tight with anger. "Why didn't you tell me about Dad's farm or the oil? His brothers just called me, offering a fair settlement if I help them contest the will. What the hell is going on?" So they'd reached out to my daughter already? The realization ignited something protective and fierce within me. They weren't just coming after me, they were trying to manipulate my grieving daughter. "I'll explain everything later," I promised, watching the police officer exchange words with the brothers. "But Jenna, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. These men are not our friends." "Mom, if there's money involved—" "This isn't about money," I interrupted, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "This is about what your father wanted. Please trust me on this." After a moment of silence, she sighed. "Fine, but call me back as soon as you can." I hung up and opened the door to face a young RCMP officer, flanked by 3 Mitchell men whose expressions ranged from smug to openly hostile. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Constable Wilson. These gentlemen have a court order requesting an inspection of the property as part of an ongoing estate dispute." I smiled calmly, channeling the strength Joshua had always admired in me. "Of course, Constable, but first, I think you should see these." I held out the blue folder containing Joshua's documentation. My husband anticipated this exact situation. The oldest brother, Robert, stepped forward with a dismissive wave. "Family property disputes are complicated, Constable. My sister-in-law is understandably emotional and confused." "Actually," I interrupted, "I'm neither emotional nor confused. I'm a widow standing on property that legally belongs to me, facing 3 strangers who happen to share my late husband's DNA." I turned to the officer, "And I'd appreciate if you'd review these documents before allowing anyone onto my property." The constable took the folder, his expression neutral, as he began examining the contents. The Mitchell brothers exchanged glances, their confidence visibly wavering for the first time. I thought of Joshua's video, of the secret he'd kept to spare me and Jenna unnecessary pain, and the magnificent gift he'd created in his final years. Whatever game his brothers were playing, I was determined not to lose the last tangible expression of my husband's love without a fight. The constable looked up from the documents. His expression changed. "These appear to be in order, Mrs. Mitchell. A clear deed transfer, properly notarized statements, even certified bank records of the original purchase." He turned to the brothers. "Gentlemen, I don't see grounds for forcing an inspection today. This appears to be a matter for the civil courts." Robert's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. That woman has no right." "That woman," I interrupted calmly, "is Joshua Mitchell's wife, and I have every right to be here." As the brothers reluctantly retreated to their vehicle, followed by the apologetic constable, I felt a strange sense of both loss and discovery. The husband I thought I knew completely had kept secrets, some painful, others breathtakingly beautiful. Now I faced a choice: retreat to the safety of my familiar life, or step fully into this unexpected legacy and the battle that came with it. I closed the door, walked back to the desk, and opened the laptop again. Tomorrow's video awaited, and with it more pieces of the man I had loved and was only now beginning to fully understand. Outside, the Mitchell brothers might have lost this skirmish, but their expressions as they drove away made one thing clearly apparent. The war for Maple Creek Farm had only just begun. I spent that night in our farmhouse, surrounded by the evidence of his secret labor of love. Sleep eluded me, my mind churning with revelations. Joshua's hidden illness, the transformed farm, his brother's determination to claim it, and the hundreds of video messages awaiting me on the laptop. At dawn, I explored the property properly for the first time. The main house was a masterpiece of restoration, blending original farmhouse elements with modern comforts. Every room reflected thoughtful consideration of my tastes, from the library, filled with first editions of my favorite novels, to the sunroom overlooking the eastern pastures, perfect for morning coffee. The following days unfolded like a cruel play, and David was the lead actor, trapped in a role he never imagined for himself. Each morning, he sat hunched at the kitchen table, with his head in his hands, surrounded by letters stamped in bold red. Past due, final notice, legal action pending. His phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers, and when he answered, his voice shifted between anger and desperation. "I told you, I don't have the money right now," he barked one afternoon before slamming the phone down so hard the table rattled. I simply sipped my tea, watching in silence. The boy who once strutted through life with Melissa on his arm, laughing at his own cleverness, was now unraveling before my eyes. And part of me ached because no matter what he had done to me, he was still my son. But another part, the part Robert had prepared with his secret letters and quiet planning, knew that this unraveling was necessary. One evening, David returned from checking the mailbox, a single crumpled envelope in his hand. He dropped it on the table with a hollow laugh. "Melissa filed for separation. She's staying in France. She says she can't handle my mess, that she has to think about her own future." His voice cracked as he read the words again, eyes wet with disbelief. "She left me, Mom. She really left me." I looked at him, my heart tightening, but I kept my tone calm. "She showed you who she really is, David. Believe her the first time." He groaned, burying his face in his arms. That night, I overheard him pacing his old room, muttering, "How did it come to this? How did I lose everything?" The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought he lost everything when Melissa left, but the truth was, he never owned anything to begin with. The condo, the cabin, even the ground he walked on. It had all been mine through Robert's careful planning. He was just beginning to taste the truth. 2 mornings later, as I trimmed the rose bushes Robert had planted years ago, Aurora came rushing across the lawn, eyes wide with gossip. "Margaret, did you hear? Melissa's debts are exploding overseas. My cousin works at a bank in New York that's linked to their Paris accounts. Apparently, Melissa tried to pull out more money but couldn't. And now, the banks here are chasing David harder than ever." She shook her head, lowering her voice. "They say his name is on forged loan papers. Some even have your signature, Margaret. Did you know about this?" My chest clenched, but I forced a smile. "People talk, Aurora. You know how rumors are." She studied me closely, but nodded, leaving me to my thoughts. That night, I called Charles Whitman. "David's drowning," I told him, "and Melissa abandoned him. What's the full picture of his debts?" Charles hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Harris, it's worse than I thought. Over $200,000 owed, multiple banks involved, and some of the paperwork does appear to carry forged signatures, yours and his. Legally, he's in a very dangerous position. Unless we intervene, he could face not only bankruptcy, but criminal charges." My grip tightened on the phone. "Can you prove he didn't sign knowingly?" "With enough evidence, yes, but it will take time and money." I stared at Robert's photograph on the mantel. His smile seemed to say, "You know what to do." "Do it, Charles," I whispered, "but don't tell David. Not yet. He needs to feel the weight of this a little longer." When I hung up, I sat in silence, listening to David's muffled sobs from the other room. Every motherly instinct screamed to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, that I had the power to save him. But I remembered the coldness of that phone call in the doctor's office, the way he had cut me off without a shred of hesitation. He needed to understand the consequences of betrayal, not just toward me, but toward himself. Days blurred into one another. David started disappearing in the mornings, returning late at night with tired eyes and empty hands. "I've been looking for work," he admitted one evening, slumping into the chair across from me. "But no one wants to hire someone with lawsuits hanging over their head. The best offer I got was part-time janitorial work at night. Can you believe that? Me, cleaning floors?" He laughed bitterly, but I caught the shame in his eyes. "There's no shame in honest work, David," I said gently. "Your father believed that every dollar earned with dignity was more than 1,000 gained through deceit." He shook his head, looking away. I wish I'd listened to him. I wanted to tell him it wasn't too late, but I bit my tongue. He wasn't ready for comfort yet. Meanwhile, the eviction deadline ticked closer. Each day, David grew more frantic, making desperate phone calls, begging Melissa for answers, only to be met with silence. And every night, he returned to the house where I waited, playing my role as the quiet, sympathetic mother, never letting on that I held the key to everything he had lost. One evening, as he sat at the table, rifling through papers, he looked up suddenly. "Mom, I don't know what to do. I don't have money. I don't have a home. I don't have Melissa. I don't even know who I am anymore." His voice cracked. "What if I can't come back from this?" I reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "Sometimes, son, the only way forward is through the fire. Maybe losing everything is the only way you'll learn what truly matters." He looked at me, confusion flickering across his face, as if my words carried a meaning he couldn't quite grasp. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Later that night, I stood at the window watching the streetlights glow against the dark Denver sky. "Robert," I whispered in my heart, "he's breaking, but not broken enough. Let him fall just a little further. The time for truth will come, but only when he's ready to hear it." And with that, I turned away from the window, knowing that the storm was only beginning to rage. By the second week of David's stay, the house had grown heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of him shuffling papers or muttering into the phone. His confidence, once sharp as glass, had dulled into something pitiful, and each day he looked more like a man standing in the ruins of his own life. One morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table in the same wrinkled shirt from the day before, staring at a crumpled flyer. "What's that?" I asked, pouring my coffee. He looked up, shame coloring his cheeks. "It's a janitorial job at a warehouse downtown. Nights only, minimum wage. They'll hire anyone who can push 'em up." He gave a hollow laugh. "Imagine me, Mom, David Harris, who once wore designer suits to dinners in Paris, now scrubbing toilets." I set my cup down and met his eyes. "There is no shame in honest work. Your father would have told you the same." He swallowed hard, and I saw something flicker there. Regret, maybe? Or a memory of Robert's steady voice. That night, he went to the warehouse, and when he returned at dawn, his shoulders sagged, his hands blistered. "It's awful," he muttered, dropping into Robert's old chair. "But it's all I've got." I wanted to tell him he had so much more, but the time wasn't right. Instead, I nodded. Sometimes the worst jobs teach us the best lessons. He said nothing, just rubbed his hands and stared into the distance. Meanwhile, Charles Whitman kept me updated. The truck was back in my name, the cabin restored, and the apartment building fully under my control. "Mrs. Harris," he said during one call, "we also uncovered forged signatures on several loans. With the evidence we've gathered, we can clear your name entirely and leave David legally responsible." I considered this quietly before answering. "Hold that for now. Don't file anything yet. Let him feel the weight of it first." Charles sighed. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Harris. Most would seek revenge quickly." I smiled faintly. "Revenge too soon is just anger. Revenge after patience, that's justice." That same evening, as I washed the dinner dishes, David came into the kitchen, looking broken in a way I had never seen. "Mom," he said, voice trembling, "I don't think I can do this. Melissa drained everything. The banks want money I'll never have. I can't live in that condo. I can't afford a lawyer. I can't even afford gas half the time. I'm drowning." His eyes welled, and for the first time since he was a little boy, he let the tears fall in front of me. I dried my hands slowly, resisting the urge to pull him into my arms. Instead, I placed the towel on the counter and said, "Maybe drowning is what you need. Sometimes a person has to go under before they can see the surface." He blinked at me, confused, but I held his gaze. "Your father always said the hardest storms are the ones that teach us who we really are. You've lived too long without storms, David. Maybe now you'll finally understand." He turned away, retreating to his room, and I exhaled slowly. I knew he was near the edge, near the place where pride gives way to humility, and that was the moment Robert's plan would matter most. In the quiet of the night, I opened the hidden box once more. Inside were not just deeds and bank papers, but something I hadn't told David yet: jewelry. Robert had collected antique pieces for years, quietly, selling small items and trading until he had amassed a collection worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rings, necklaces, brooches, all tucked into velvet pouches, shining faintly in the lamplight. I ran my fingers over a sapphire pendant, remembering the day Robert had surprised me with it, grinning like a boy. "One day," he had whispered, "this will mean more than money." He had been right. Because it wasn't just wealth. It was proof of foresight, of love, of trust. And I knew that when the time came, these jewels would play a role in showing David the truth of everything his father had built and everything he had so carelessly betrayed. And when that truth came, it would change him forever, or destroy him completely. By the third week, I could see David's pride shrinking day by day, worn away like stone under running water. He rose in the evenings for his janitorial job, dragging his feet out the door, and came home at dawn smelling of bleach and exhaustion. He ate quietly, sometimes not at all, his shoulders bent as though invisible weights pressed him down. One evening, after another long shift, he sat at the kitchen table staring at his blistered hands. "Mom," he said, his voice flat, "do you think Dad would be ashamed of me?" The question struck me harder than I expected. I set down my teacup, studying his hollow eyes, the broken man where a proud boy once stood. "Ashamed? No," I answered carefully. "But disappointed? Yes. Your father believed in honesty, in responsibility. He would be disappointed that you let greed blind you, that you treated family as disposable." David's face crumpled, and he pressed his palms into his eyes, silent tears slipping through. My heart squeezed, but I didn't rush to comfort him. He needed to sit with that pain, to face the reflection of his choices. Later that night, as he slept, I unlocked the box under my floorboards and pulled out one velvet pouch. Inside was a brooch, gold with emeralds shaped into leaves. Robert had found it at an estate sale 30 years ago, beaming as he showed it to me. "It's not just jewelry, Maggie," he'd said. "It's history, it's legacy." The next morning, I placed the brooch on the table where David would see it when he came in. His eyes widened the moment he spotted it. "What's this?" he asked, picking it up carefully. I sipped my tea, watching his reaction. It was your father's. He collected things quietly, things that mattered more than money. That brooch alone is worth more than your last 6 paychecks. His mouth fell open. Dad had this? I never knew. There's a lot you never knew, I said evenly. He didn't trust you with it, not then. His jaw tightened, guilt flashing across his face. And you just kept it. I kept everything, I said, my tone cool but steady, because your father believed I was the only one who would protect it. David's eyes dropped, shame coloring his cheeks. He was right, he whispered. For the rest of the day, he was unusually quiet, carrying the weight of the brooch in his pocket as if it were a stone pulling him down. That night, I overheard him in his room whispering to himself, "What else did Dad hide? What else don't I know?" I smiled faintly in the dark. He was starting to wonder, starting to realize that the world he thought belonged to him was never his at all. The next evening, I took another step. After dinner, I laid out an envelope on the table, one of Robert's bank statements showing dividends from shares David had never even heard of. When David saw the numbers, his face went pale. This was Dad's? No, I corrected. This is mine. He left it all to me because he knew I would guard it. Do you see now why he didn't trust you? His hand shook as he held the paper. I ruined everything. I sold the cabin, the truck. God, Mom, I thought I was helping us, but I wasn't. I was helping myself, and I hurt you most of all. His voice cracked as he looked at me with tears running down his cheeks. I don't deserve forgiveness. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Forgiveness isn't something you deserve. It's something you earn. And so far, all you've earned is a bed in the room you abandoned years ago. He dropped his gaze, unable to meet my eyes. The following day, as he left for work, I whispered to Robert's photograph, "He's learning love. Slowly, painfully, but he's learning." Still, I knew the true reveal had not yet come. I'd only shown him fragments, glimpses of what Robert had left behind. The full truth, the weight of his inheritance and betrayal, would come when the time was right. That evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance, David returned home soaked from a sudden storm. He peeled off his wet jacket, dropping heavily into the chair. "Mom," he said, voice raw, "if I lose everything, if I end up on the street, would you still let me stay here?" I studied him carefully. "Yes, but not forever, because staying here means facing what you did, and one day I'll make you face it all." His brows furrowed, confusion flickering across his tired face, but he didn't press me. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if accepting some truth he couldn't yet name. Later that night, as he slept, I opened Robert's box again, my fingers tracing the velvet pouches, the deeds, the letters. The time was drawing near. Soon, I would lay it all before him, the properties, the shares, the jewels, the truth of what his father had done. And when I did, David would finally see that the empire he thought was his to squander had always been built for me. The question wasn't whether he could handle the truth. The question was whether he could survive it. The storm hadn't let up by the next morning, and it felt almost fitting, as though the heavens themselves had decided to bear witness to what I was about to do. I had played the role of the quiet, abandoned widow for weeks, letting David believe I had nothing, letting him sweat through nights of cleaning offices and days of silent shame. But the time had come to pull back the curtain. After breakfast, I told him we needed to go downtown. He looked up from his bowl of oatmeal with weary eyes. "Why? I don't have any money left for lawyers." "This isn't about money," I said, slipping Robert's final envelope into my purse. "It's about the truth." He didn't ask again, but I could see the anxiety etched on his face as we boarded the bus, his damp jacket pressed against the window as raindrops streaked past. We arrived at Mr. Carlyle's office, the lawyer Robert had trusted most in life. David shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, glancing around the mahogany panel walls as though he didn't belong there. Mr. Carlyle greeted us warmly, though his eyes flickered with recognition of the real purpose behind our visit. "Mrs. Harris, are you ready?" he asked. I nodded, and he handed me a thick folder. I slid it across the desk toward David. "Open it." David hesitated, then unlatched the clasp and began leafing through the documents. At first, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then his mouth parted in shock as the weight of what he was seeing sunk in. Deeds to houses across the city, bank statements with numbers that seemed impossible, shares in companies whose names he recognized from the evening news, even the title to the very apartment building he had once called home. I don't understand," he stammered, flipping through pages with trembling hands. This says you own all of this? You?" "Yes," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the sound of rain hammering against the windows. "Your father built all of it in silence. He invested every penny we saved, every sacrifice we made, and he left it all to me because he knew you couldn't be trusted." David's face drained of color as he sank back in his chair. All this time? All this time you were rich? And you let me think you had nothing? You let me work like a dog, humiliated, scraping pennies together while you sat on this mountain of—" His words choked off into a strangled sound. "Yes," I interrupted. "I let you suffer because you needed to. Because when you called me that day and told me you'd sold the cabin and Dad's truck, you didn't just take things. You took my dignity. You took his legacy, and you did it without an ounce of hesitation. That was the moment I realized you had to be broken before you could be rebuilt." His eyes blazed with a mixture of anger and shame. "So this was all some twisted lesson to teach me a point?" "It wasn't twisted, it was necessary. You would have never learned otherwise." He slammed the folder shut, his breath ragged. "You could have saved me, Mom. You could have stopped me from working those miserable nights, from losing sleep, from drowning in shame." "And what would you have learned?" I shot back, leaning forward. "That money would always rescue you? That your mother would always clean up the mess you made? No, David. You needed to feel every ounce of consequence pressing down on you before you could understand the value of what you lost." For a long time, the only sound in the room was the rain, steady and relentless. Finally, David whispered, "Dad knew, didn't he? He knew I wasn't ready." I softened just slightly. "He loved you, but yes, he knew. He told me in his letter, if you ever learned how much we truly had, you would never look at us the same way again. He wanted you to love us for who we were, not for the size of our bank account." And he was right. David pressed his face into his hands, his shoulders shaking. For the first time in years, I saw my son not as the arrogant man who had dismissed me, but as the little boy who used to run to me after scraping his knees, seeking comfort. I don't deserve any of this," he whispered hoarsely. "No," I said, standing. "You don't. Not yet. And that's why none of it is yours. Every property, every dollar, every jewel, it's mine. But whether I share any of it with you will depend on one thing: your ability to prove that you've changed." He looked up, red-eyed. "How do I do that?" "By staying in the very place you wanted to abandon me. By working not for luxury, but for survival. By showing me every day that you can be the son your father believed you could become." His lips trembled. "And if I fail? Then you will know exactly what it means to lose everything. Permanently." Mr. Carlyle cleared his throat gently, breaking the tension. "Mrs. Harris, would you like me to continue processing the ownership transfers into your direct name?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Everything stays under my control. Nothing goes to him. Not yet." David flinched at the words, but he didn't argue. When we left the office, the rain had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and shining beneath gray skies. David walked beside me in silence, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched.
As we reached the bus stop, he finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "You're right, Mom. I needed this. I needed to see what I threw away." His admission was small, but it was a crack in the wall he had built around himself for years. As the bus rumbled toward home, I stared out the window, clutching Robert's photograph in my mind. He's learning, but the lesson isn't finished. Not yet. Until he understands respect, not just survival.
The weeks after that stormy revelation were some of the strangest of my life. By day, I lived with my son as if we were two ordinary people just trying to get by. He went to his night job, I cooked dinner, and we exchanged polite words over morning coffee. By night, I watched him carefully, measuring every sigh, every movement, every excuse he might try to make. David had seen the truth of his father's empire, but now came the real test. Would he step into humility, or would his old arrogance rear its head once more? The first crack came sooner than I expected. One evening, I found him at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, papers spread out before him. "They offered me more hours at the cleaning job," he muttered when I asked. "But it's humiliating, Mom. I'm scrubbing bathrooms alongside men half my age." His voice trembled, not from exhaustion, but from wounded pride. I sat across from him and looked him straight in the eye. "Humiliation is the tax you pay for betraying your own mother. You chose this path when you sold my memories for a suitcase full of lies. If you want to walk a new one, then start with your hands, not your pride." He glared at me but said nothing. And in that silence, I saw the boy who once threw tantrums when chores didn't go his way. The next morning, I placed an envelope on the table. Inside, a bus pass and a note that said, "Respect is earned in sweat, not speeches." He didn't thank me, but he used the pass. Days stretched into weeks, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. He began bringing home small groceries with his paychecks, milk, eggs, bread, and setting them quietly on the counter. He fixed the squeaky cabinet door in the kitchen without me asking. One Saturday, I caught him sitting with Mrs. Green, our elderly neighbor, helping her sort through bills because her eyesight had grown too weak. These were not the grand gestures of redemption, but the humble, unnoticed acts of someone learning responsibility one grain at a time. And yet, I didn't let him off the hook. "You're making progress," I told him, "but don't think a few bags of groceries erase the day you threw me away like trash." He winced, but nodded. "I know, Mom, I know." Meanwhile, Mr. Carlyle called with updates about Edward, the son-in-law who had once whispered poison into my household. He had been caught in Paris under a fake marriage scheme, the same stunt David's father had predicted years ago. The news should have given me satisfaction, but instead it made me think of all the ways deceit eats at families until nothing remains but bones. I didn't tell David immediately. Instead, I waited, testing whether he would ask about Edward out of genuine concern or selfish curiosity. 3 nights later, as we sat with bowls of stew, he finally asked, "Have you heard anything about him?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why do you care?" He hesitated. "Because he was part of this too. And if I'm going to rebuild myself, I need to face everything, not just what I did to you." His words carried weight, though whether they were truth or performance, I couldn't yet tell. "He's in prison," I said simply. "Caught in France with forged papers. He won't be coming back." David let out a long, shuddering breath, as though a ghost had finally been laid to rest. But I wasn't finished. If Robert had taught me anything, it was that real change only sticks when it is tested by fire. So I set the final trial. One morning, I handed David an envelope. "Take this to Mr. Carlyle's office. Don't open it, just deliver it." He frowned, curiosity burning in his eyes, but he obeyed. Hours later, he returned, pale as parchment. "Mom," he whispered, "do you know what was in that envelope? It was a check,
a check with more zeros than I've ever seen in my life. He said it was for a property purchase under your company's name. I set down my teacup and met his gaze steadily. And did you think about keeping it? His silence was answer enough. Finally, he whispered, yes, for a moment. I thought about running, about starting over somewhere new, but then I remembered the look on your face when you told me I had broken your trust. I couldn't do it again. A tear slipped down his cheek, unbidden. I gave it to him, Mom. Every cent. My heart ached with both pain and pride. He had faced temptation head on and, for the first time, chosen the harder path. That, I said softly, is the first honest thing you've done in years. That night, as he slept under the same roof where he once believed me poor and powerless, I walked out onto the porch with Robert's photograph clutched in my hands. He's changing, I whispered into the night sky. Slowly, painfully, but he's changing. In the rustle of the trees, I almost heard Robert's reply. Then don't let up now. Test him one last time. Make sure he never forgets what it cost him to come back. I nodded to the shadows, knowing exactly what the final act would be. David thought he had seen the full measure of his father's empire, but there was one last secret even he didn't know. One final key I had held back, waiting for the perfect moment to unlock it. The stage was set, and when the curtain fell, my son would either rise reborn or lose me forever.
The morning of the final reckoning arrived with a strange stillness. The kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. David had been living under my roof for 2 months now, working nights, bringing groceries, and trying, in his faltering way, to rebuild the bridge he had burned. But I could still see the shadows in his eyes, the pull of temptation, the echo of arrogance, the fragile thread of guilt that could either strangle him or set him free. It was time to end this game of hidden truth once and for all. I called him into the kitchen after breakfast and placed a small, weathered envelope on the table, its edges yellowed from years of waiting. Your father left me this, I said softly. I wasn't going to show you, but I think you're ready now. He reached for it with trembling hands, sliding the paper open like it was a fragile relic. Inside was a single key taped to a note in Robert's handwriting. If David has returned to you with a humble heart, give him this. It opens the safe deposit box downtown. Inside is something that belongs to both of you, but only if he has truly changed. David stared at the note for a long time, his lips moving as he traced the familiar script of the man he betrayed without even realizing it. His eyes met mine, wide and almost childlike. Do you believe I've changed, Mom? I held his gaze steady. That's not a question for me to answer, David. It's a question for you to prove. The next morning we walked together to the bank, the air crisp and biting, our breaths fogging in unison. Inside, the clerk led us down to the vault, the metallic clang of the door echoing like a drumbeat. David slid the key into box 311, turned it, and pulled out a heavy metal container. His hands shook as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped neatly in velvet cloth, were bundles of documents, a thick ledger, and at the very top, a letter addressed to him in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. David unfolded it, his voice trembling as he read aloud. My son, if you are reading this, then you have already walked through fire. You may think wealth is measured in dollars and deeds, but it is not. True wealth is measured in respect, responsibility, and the love you protect, not exploit. If you cannot honor those, then everything in this box is worthless. But if you can,
then this ledger is yours. It holds the details of the foundation your mother and I built in secret, the Harris Fund. It was created not for luxury, but for legacy. Its purpose is to help families who fall into the same traps we once feared for you: debt, betrayal, abandonment. If you want it, you must vow to use it only for others, never for yourself. David's hands shook as tears streamed down his cheeks, dripping onto the page. He didn't trust me, he whispered. Not then, maybe not even now. No, I said gently. He loved you enough to make you earn his trust. That's the hardest kind of love there is. David picked up the ledger, flipping through the meticulous notes Robert had kept, records of donations already made, scholarships funded, women and children saved from ruin. It was a map of quiet generosity, a testament to a man who had worn the uniform of a bus driver by day, but had built an empire of compassion in silence. Mom, David said hoarsely, what if I fail? What if I can't live up to this? I reached across the table and took his hand. Then you'll get up and try again. That's what your father wanted. That's what I demand. For the first time, his tears weren't just of guilt or fear. They were of acceptance, of surrender to something bigger than himself. He nodded, clutching the ledger to his chest like a lifeline. Then I'll do it. I'll carry it. Not because I deserve it yet, but because I want to. In that moment, I saw the boy I raised, the man I had feared lost forever, finally stepping forward with the humility Robert had prayed for. As we left the bank, sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the wet pavement. It felt like Robert himself was blessing the moment, telling me that the storm had passed and the lesson was complete. But still, one final truth remained. That night, as David sat at the kitchen table studying the ledger, I poured us both a glass of wine and sat opposite him. There's something you should know, I said, firm but calm. He looked up, nervous. What is it? I smiled faintly. I never stopped loving you, David. Not even when you broke me. That's why I let you suffer. Because love isn't always about rescuing. Sometimes love is about letting the people we care about face the weight of their own choices. His eyes filled again, and for once, he didn't hide it. He reached across the table and gripped my hand with a desperation that wasn't about money or power, but about connection. I don't deserve you, Mom. No, I corrected. Squeezing his hand, you didn't. But now you're learning how to. We sat there in silence, two survivors of betrayal and grief, finally building something real from the ruins. Robert's empire was no longer just numbers on paper. It was the bond forged in the fire of our mistakes, a legacy that would outlive both of us. And as I watched my son bow his head over his father's words, I knew we had reached the end of this story, but the beginning of something far greater. Because in the end, revenge hadn't been my goal. It had been resurrection. And we had achieved it together.